Needlepoint, the Record Collector podcast with Paul Lester and Daryl Easlea.
Hi, I'm Paul Lester, editor of Record Collector, Britain's oldest, longest enduring music monthly.
And I'm Daryl Easlea. I too work for Record Collector, and I'm the editor of Record Collector's Rare Record Price Guide.
And this is our new podcast, Needlepoint, where we look at rock's rich tapestry, as Julie Burchill once called it, through the prism of the latest issue of our magazine.
And what we will be doing is taking it like a record itself. We'll be looking at side one, which will be all the standard features, the news, we'll be catching up with what we're doing. And then side two will be devoted to the big main features. And as you can see, this time it's old Johnny himself.
Indeed, yeah, John Lydon is our cover star this issue. And yeah, it's quite an interesting one. Shall I tell you all about it?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so... ladies and gentlemen, about 48 years ago, Johnny Rotten did something quite shocking and outrageous. He appeared on Capital Radio talking about his record collection. And what was shocking about it was that it wasn't full of Cortinas and Chelsea records. What he was listening to, apparently, what got him really excited musically, were a surprising series of artists from the early to mid 70s. Yeah. Such as Peter Hamill, Augustus Pablo.
Did you say Peter Hamill?
Peter Hamill, yeah. Are you rooting around your record collection to show us the kind of thing?
There is the Peter Hamill album. He said, "Ladies Big Chance," one of my absolute favourites.
Well, you know, that was what was fascinating about it, because it was 1977 and they called it Year Zero. And the idea was that nobody dared listen to any music before 1977, but so obviously wasn't the case. A lot of the punks were ex-hippies or were prog rockers or lapsed prog rockers, and that was what was really interesting about it, was finding out about Johnny Rotten via his record collection. So what I thought would be a good idea 48 years later, on the eve of Lydon's solo talking tour and some pill dates, what I thought would be a good idea was to recreate that 1977 moment where rifling through his record collection to find out what made him tick. I thought we'd try it again in 2024, 2025, and that's exactly what we've done.
Yeah,
we got our Simon Goddard, author of many books on David Bowie and Steve Diggle, among others.
Yes,
we got him to do a Zoom interview with Mr. Lydon, and we sent a photographer around from our coterie. No, that's not quite right.
They don't need to know that much detail. I mean, I love them doing it. We do, but I mean, it's
yeah. Well, I thought what was interesting was that we had the photographer from LA going around to his house and allowed total access to his stuff, including his member of John Chappell. So we had the journalist over Zoom over here, photographer over there in LA, and Lydon was obviously very much up for a chat. He was very open, very candid, talking about being grief-stricken in the wake of the death of his beloved Nora, and talking about the role that his record collection has played in his recuperation, and it just is the story of his life via his records.
No, and it is lovely, because it's and here's a pull-out quote from it: "Not to have her there, my lovely Nora, it does take time, man. Grief, it really does." And I think it's that. There's a lot of misconceptions about Lydon, and he doesn't really do himself favours at times with some of the stuff he comes out with, still being a contrarian. But, there is no doubt how genuine a sort of human being he is. And he's got friends he's kept for years, he was so in love with Nora. And I think that, comes out in this interview. I think it's beautifully done. Images of all the key records. I mean, look at some of those beauties there. Todd Rundgren, you're familiar with his work, aren't you, Paul?
I'd like to say I didn't strong arm Mr. Goddard into making sure he mentioned Todd, but Todd Rundgren and 10cc.
Not bad. For those of you who don't know, dear listener, you'll find out as Needlepoint progresses that Paul is absolutely obsessed. And it's almost too sweet a word to use about Todd Rundgren, the runt, as I believe he was once called. That was Todd, not Paul. But it's also got the list here, just coming back to Johnny, of those records from that Capital Radio interview. So I think it's a beautiful piece.
I totally agree. Over 14 pages, no less. I mean, that's the great thing about our features. We do go to town. We do allow give them space to breathe. And I think this is it should be a really it's a fascinating one. Generally, Lydon, when he does interviews, there's almost like an obligation on the part of the journalist to try and get him to be outrageous and just to say daft things. This one works much better. This is a much more intimate, low key, and candid affair. You find out more about him probably over the 14 pages of this interview than any number of front cover stories where he's being called upon to be Johnny Rotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just that thing of shying away from that is really, really good. Also, what is really good in the new issue is
we just mentioned it, didn't we?
Closer to
10cc.
Which is just brilliant for having that picture with Peter Cook, of course, who was the voice on their much discussed, debated 3-album concept, Consequences. And I've written about, I know the album really well, but I've never seen a picture of them all together, which is brilliant.
Well, look, we were talking there about upending, upturning people's preconceptions about Johnny Rotten, John Lydon.
Yeah,
And that's exactly what David Stubbs, the journalist, does here with Kevin Godley and Lol Cream of 10cc, because 10cc routinely get dismissed as purveyors of easygoing, pabulum, mellifluous, guilty pleasures, soft rock, yacht rock, whatever you want to call it. Whereas actually argues Mr. Stubbs in this article, a really good article, and an interview with Kevin Godley, what he does, he argues that they actually belong more in the pantheon of acerbic and experimental greats such as Mothers of Invention, Van Dyke Parks, Sparks, and Steely Dan.
Yeah.
Not Christopher Cross and I don't know, Michael McDonald. Well, no, there's nothing wrong with Christopher Cross and Michael McDonald, but that just 10cc. Just if, in fact, actually, I tend to tell people when they say, well, "What do you think 10cc are like? Where do you think they belong?" I tend to think of them as the missing link between the Aphex Twin and the Arches. I mean, I know that's pushing it somewhat, but much more than you'd imagine, and especially when you consider that Godley and Cream were born out of the 60s Mersey beat or Manc beat scene. Incredible to think that 25 or 30 years beyond that, Lol Cream was a member of the Art of Noise with Rakim and Trevor Horn and Kevin Godley. Kevin Godley actually, even more than Lol himself, and certainly more than Goldman and Stewart, is almost the in-house surrealist of the band, and it was him that said that actually when you want to compare and contrast us with anybody contemporary, you should think more in the realms of Missy Elliott, which again you might think is far-fetched, but no, I think 10cc music, it's like little tiny zany vignettes within songs, and they're sort of almost put together with a willful disregard for what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, obviously everyone bases the yacht rock thing on I'm Not in Love, and maybe Things We Do for Love, two of the Stewart Goldman songs, the sort of pure pop end. But as you say, it was just a small percentage. Like so many careers, the whole career is sort of almost defined by the small percentage that becomes the big hit. And that's why we've always read about so many bands splitting because of the hit. And the audiences change. How many interviews do you read where they always say, and once we had a hit, the audience changed, and then that led to all those problems. I mean, the thing with 10cc, it wasn't the audience changed, the group changed. I mean, when you look at they left, that period of them leaving was so short. Nowadays, and they've all said that, they say in that piece, they would have just actually have a year off, do your album, your solo album, and come back. But it was a bit like, in the August they were still playing with the other two, and then like a month later, because they wanted to release their own album, they were booted out.
I know, I can't remember a band where there was such a sort of dramatic, vertiginous change of circumstance.
Yes,
I think they were at Nebworth, weren't they, in the summer?
They were,
and it was all over by the autumn. So something spectacularally wrong must have happened, between July, August, and October, whatever it was.
The week before the party, I don't know if this is in the feature, but there was some disc presentation, as there always seemed to be in the 70s, in some country house garden party, and all four of them were together then.
Oh, that isn't that the photo that looks like it's taken from the inner sleeve of How Dare You, where Paul McCartney's there and they're all acting out a sort of a scene from. You can imagine them they'd all be on their iPhones today and sort of half partying, half engrossed in what's happening on their iPhones. But
life, brother.
But
yes,
I think all sorts of things happen behind the scene. I did do an interview with Kevin Godley once where he made me sign a document saying, I promised not to mention any of the things he was going to say in the interview. And then I said, "Oh, can I mention that in the interview that you wanted me to sign a document?" There's so much cloak and dagger stuff happening behind it. You just wouldn't expect it of these four chaps who sometimes get described as four backing men.
Absolutely.
Lacking in sort of vim or personality. Far from it. There was more behind the scenes shenanigans in 10cc than virtually any other band. But again, then they remain one of the bands that have never ever reformed.
Yeah.
Along with the Jam and the Smiths, and now of course with the sad death of the Jam's drummer Rick Buckler. That's never going to happen.
I know, and absolutely, and we can't not sort of mention that without in today's podcast, because it's like the wave of sort of grief for that is similar to when Terry Hall went, because I think it's people, pop stars of my generation, you sort of expect the older ones to die because they're older and there was different times, but sort of like, the Jam were, my senior school was 77 to 82, and that was like the Jam's career, 77 to 82. And it didn't matter if you were like the Punk or Skin or Rasta or whatever. Everyone sort of liked the Jam. It was a sort of respect for them. And I've said, they were like the kids in the year above you, the cool ones who had a band, and they'd look out for the younger kids. Madness would also be in the year above you, but they'd always be in trouble. They'd always be sort of like causing a fight or outside the headmaster's office, where the Jam would be sort of, cool and looked after you. And it's been a real, I suppose all of these passings make you think of your own mortality. But the fact you did somehow think that maybe one day, because Foxton and Weller got back together, and you thought, well, maybe the three of them at some point. But like the Smiths, it can't ever happen now. So we've got 10cc left, we've got Slade left, Supertramp left. I try to work on the bands where all members are still alive, but it's that classic.
It's amazing how much sort of fear and loathing there is in these bands that make this incredible music and enjoying such tremendous success. You'd think they'd want to keep it going for as long as possible, but in a way, it's to their credit that they're able to step away from the success and actually pursue things more for artistic reasons. I mean, that's why Lowell and Kev left NCC. They wanted to do the stuff with the Gizmo, that gadget and Weller as well. There aren't that many instances of bands breaking up at the height of their fame. 10cc were one, and the Jam were the other. I guess the Beatles would have to get a mention there, but they're not many.
I've heard of them. No, it's right, and I mean, I think what Weller did, that has almost, it's not a perfect body of work. I mean, I think the thing with Jam fans, they always, hardcore Jam fans and Weller fans sort of overrate them, and the people that don't like them underrate them. I think that's something. Those singles, that run of singles from Strange Town to Malice, it's just like, Jesus, they're astonishing records.
They're pretty good. I did read. I was surprised actually. I mean, I know a little bit about the Jam, not a hell of a lot. I had no idea it was Foxton apparently who came up with Going Underground.
Oh, really?
Which is why that's the only song he was allowed to play in latter day iterations of whatever his performing unit were called from the Jam or whatever it was called. I mean, if that was the only one he wrote, I mean, for me that is the best Jam.
Yeah, no, he wrote Smithers Jones, which Weller helped at the end of, and
right, okay, but yeah, one of those incredible bands that you talk about sort of volte-fasces or changes of direction. I mean, the journey from the Jam to the Style Council. Well, I mean, volte-face, and what it doesn't quite cover it, does it?
Well, I'll take volte-face. They were futurist group, weren't they? One single on Mute. They weren't really.
Oh, very good.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we're there. So you're getting the idea of what Needlepoint will be. We said we'd do it like an album. We won't. We're just going to talk about pop music and the magazine.
What about pop.com?
Oh, pop. Isn't it beautiful? What is beautiful, though, is the mag, and also is the Rare Record Price Guide. And what's great, and what I'm really looking to do more, and thank you, Paul, for letting me, is get more and more prices and values in, and we did that with the Lydon. It's almost my view is we should never have a picture of an album without its information down below, because I know how important that is to so many of you, and that's what makes us unique. And of course, we've had some lovely feedback about the guide, but a price is a guide. That's the whole thing, and it's brilliant when someone goes, "Well, Michael Jackson, bad, £10. I've seen it for 50p down there." And of course, you've seen it for 50p down there. But if you want that really sort of nice, pristine one, someone will charge £50 for it. I was at the Amiga auction last week, and if someone wants something, they're going to pay, what they really want to have it in their collection. And
is it true, or that trope that a record is it the value is what you're prepared to pay for it, which is what they say about houses? Is that true?
I think to a point, because there's certain things, as we all know, there are things out there which are made to be collector's editions, and they don't necessarily go for a lot of money because the group isn't that collectible, or whatever. Whereas there's certain things, what you find now is the completist, people do want everything. And I saw that at Amiga with that Stooges. There was an American Stooges with a press kit, first album, and in that press kit there was a poster that hadn't been available anywhere, or very, very rare. It went for £6,800. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't want to devalue everything we do, but it's like, wow. So I think the value, I wouldn't pay £6,000 if I had £6,800. I could just imagine coming home and going, "Oh, I've bought this." It's like kitchen, holiday, university, all the things you would normal life, running the car, paying the mortgage, all the things that money would do in real life. But
music is not just a matter of life and death. It's more important than that.
Absolutely.
As the great Bill Shankly once said.
Frankly. But yes, I think it's a very interesting thing. If I wouldn't pay that money for it, but that person really did want to pay for it. So I think, it is exactly that, what you'll pay for it. And you see these ridiculous prices, ludicrously high, which are great. It's very exciting. And what is nice is that it just gets music talked about and out there in a way. It's it's still one of the things that gets music sort of in the papers. Not that music needs to be, music gets in the papers all the time, but sort of collecting and things like that.
Well, the collecting is a really big deal, and actually, in a way, we're in the invidious position of having collectors within our pages that are almost more stars than the artists that they're talking about. You get some collectors who have almost a quasi mythical kind of reputations. Some refuse to be in our pages because their collections are just worth so much damn money that they fear for their collections being under threat from nefarious types that are trying to make a fast buck. But yeah, I mean, look at that chap there in the collector. Every month we have a collector.
Sorry, Enzo. Who's Enzo? Is his mate? It's Errol Ansis. I knew there was a there somewhere. But this is amazing. This guy, lives in New York, and he just loves. I mean, it's not always prog, but sometimes it is quite a lot. But he loves Henry Cow. It's like, what's a sort of financier in New York doing liking Henry Cow? But how brilliant! And again, showing that not everything in there. I mean, yes, the July album famously is a 500 quidder, but like the Henry Cow album, it's the third one with Slap Happy. It's 30 quid. It's not a fortune. And collecting, I think there's that thing you can collect and be perfectly happy with, rows and rows of £30 albums, £10 albums, £5, or you can have rows of £500 albums.
But if you're prepared to spend your day doing it, you could almost make it your day job, couldn't you? Buying and selling, judicious purchases and sales via Discord or wherever, using whichever kind of sources or
many platforms are available.
Yeah, exactly.
But using collector as your basis, obviously.
Well, how do we circumvent that? And I should know the answer to this question, but you're Mr. Record Price Guide. If a record is valued at 50 quid in January 2025, what happens in January 2026 and beyond, all the way up to January 2027 when the next guide comes out? What do we do about the value of it then? How do we deal with that? within our pages or beyond?
Well, one of the sources we use is we get sales data from some shops, dealers, 2 years worth of data, so we can look at the prices and how that's a record has fared over that time, and also using the checks and balances of online, all the sites that are there. I go to fairs at least twice a month, and just seeing and talking to people and seeing where it is. Certain records will, let me state the bleeding obvious. Some will hold their value, some will shoot up. Sometimes you get a sort of blip. It's like Zeppelin, that film that's out now. I realised I didn't have the first Zeppelin album on vinyl, and I quite fancied it. I wasn't going to go and pay the turquoise sleeve or the plum label, £2,000, £150. Just wanted a nice sort of, 70s pressing reissue that I could just, enjoy. I have it on CD, but, I thought it was so good it's showcased in that film. Anyway, could I find it? I went to a couple of fairs, and normally, it would be there, and virtually every stall, apart from having the high ticket ones, they'd all sold because of the film. So I think Zeppelin prices, are generally on the rise at the moment. I mean, they're always very strong, but obviously once the film was played through and all that, they might settle back down again. And that's why the team we used to put the book together, we sort of just, almost like, you can't do it with the 150,000 entries, but you can do it with all, the key. Well, I mean, we aim to do it with every single one. Some, are going to just sort of flatline, and some drop. It's like, well, some drop and come back. I mean, Frankie's a classic example of that. All of that stuff was so sought after, and there was a period where you could have, things like the Hibakusha mix and all of that.
Yeah, I got the Hibakusha. I remember it being worth 30 quid in '84. I mean, that was quite a big deal in those days.
Yeah.
What is it worth now then?
Hibakusha is worth, I think it's not hugely more than that now. Let's have a little look. But it's but you see, Frankie got cool again, and once that happened, the prices went up again.
And how will that be? How will that cool and the value of Frankie stuff be affected by the box set that's due out later on this year? I think October, November, which apparently has got BBC sessions and demos that have never seen the light of day. Will it affect? Will it make them more of a more valuable or less so?
It will maintain, if anything, it will stoke demand for the originals, and it will therefore they will rise.
And how in turn will that affect the kudos of 80s music? When you think of classic music with the most value as being the 60s stuff, Beggar's Banquet, I don't know, the White Album, whatever it happens to be. But what about those 80s albums? Will there ever be a point when they become as sought after as the all-time great, the Pantheon greats?
Well, obviously, as people age, you're seeing this now. The 50s used to be incredibly collectible, and it's, of course, it has its market and it's there, but that wide scale sort of thing has gone because a lot of the people sadly have passed away. And I think 60s, there's like the two tiers. You've got, I can't imagine there will ever be a time where the Beatles aren't collectible. Because the way, the skillful way they're sort of reintroduced to every generation, it's quite the thing. But I think, and Hendrik, the big ones will be there. But I think some of those sort of the second and third tiers, which sold well at the time and were worth a lot of money, are not holding their value in the way they were. Coming back to the 80s, I mean, the thing was, there were so many copies of those albums produced by that time, and like a single pressing, whereas they kept repressing stuff. Just look in the book of all the entries for Please Please Me, by 60.
But then I've heard people say, collector types such as yourself, say that actually it's the blockbuster likes of Thriller and Rumours, where there were loads of iterations that do go for money these days, because they were so big, those records, they get bought and sold so many times, they were treated so badly. Finding a decent one is really difficult. So if you do get a rare, a really pristine version of A Dark Side of the Moon, actually that's going to be worth more than something obscure and
Oh
culty
yeah.
and collectible.
Oh no, absolutely. And if you've got I was looking in the in our auction feature in the magazine, the whole love of lots, where I mean, if you've got a Dark Side of the Moon with the block triangle,
Yeah,
because all the other ones were empty. I mean, that went for this was on eBay, £2,500 if you got
Ooh,
the block one.
not bad.
So I mean that's the interesting thing. But no, you're right. I mean, it's all about the condition of it. And I was around very good friends the other night, and I looked at his records, and we both bought Animals by Pink Floyd on the day it came out. I remember it, and because I was much younger than him, my copies sort of was played to death, and it's all a bit battered, and his is sort of beautiful, just played but really looked after.
Mm.
And that's why a mint copy of Animals is about £100 now. An album that was very mass produced, where mine it would still be worth £20, I would say, because it's or a tenner because it's been played to death. So you're
What
right.
about something? Yeah. Well, I was going to say, what about something nominally scratchy and indie? Because I've noticed that Edwyn Collins is back with a new album. How much would my original postcard singles be worth? Poor Old Soul, Simply Thrilled Honey,
Well, I
Camera.
think Postcard retains its value nicely because of its its innate collectability. I mean, I think that whole thing with the way that they were packaged. I mean, Falling and Laughing, the first edition with the postcards. I mean, there was only some random number like 961 made of them, and that's about £400.
Mm.
And then the reissue's about £100. Blue Boy, then you're looking 50 £50. Simply Thrilled Honey is about £65. So nice if they're looked after.
Mm.
It's lovely. And the other area is the early 90s albums, 90s vinyl, because there was so little of it made, is a huge market. It's fascinating to see records that I worked for Our Price, and I just remember going around these stores when vinyl was finally on the way out, and there was like one pocket of vinyl left, and it was all sold off for like 99p, and we were struggling to sell it. And I always remember seeing Neil Young Harvest Moon for 99p, and that's like about £150 now.
Cool. That period would cover then early 90s up into early 2000s, because one of our writers, John Earls, wants to write an article about about the resurgence of interest and therefore value in 21st century stuff like hard fi.
Yeah. I know.
Because there weren't that many made at the
Definitely.
time, because it was just before the resurgence of interest in vinyl.
Yeah, it was and I remember, I worked at Universal. I was like, hey, look where I've worked, everyone. But I worked there, and I worked with Weller, come back to Paul Weller, and he still wanted his stuff pressed on vinyl because that was his, favourite thing, and CD was right at his height. And I remember it was almost like, there were you could go round the corner to a bloke with a vinyl press and get 300 done in about an hour. And now, with the vinyl, because it was just dance music saved vinyl. If it hadn't have been for dance music, 12s being cut, I think all of the lathes would have gone probably.
Actually, it's a good point though. Weller, you could almost argue, is one of the few examples of modern classic. I think he put a record out called Modern Classic.
Yeah.
He's a sort of a new classicist that is starting to work his way into that pantheon of all-time greats alongside the McCartneys and the Jagger Riches of this world. He's one of the few from that era, compared to someone like, say, a Costello, who was far more critically acclaimed in the late 70s. At the time, he was God, wasn't he? Whereas now, I can't remember. Are any of Costello's albums, do they go for money?
There's the Imperial Bedroom interview disc, which still goes. I mean, Imperial Bedroom is one of those albums that people discover and come back to. So that was it was called a Conversation with Elvis Costello.
What about the Armed Forces with the live single?
Yeah, the original one is about 20 quid.
Right.
I mean, again, if you get a lovely minty fresh, again, is what people are prepared to pay. I think there's the first pressing of My Aim Is True with the hypens that, it had full of stiff bravado, and it had help us hype Elvis promo insert. That's about 150 quid all in.
And you get the different iterations of this year's model with slightly different takes on the camera cover.
You got with the single about 25 quid. They're not huge. I mean that interview hour was about 50 quid. But I mean, Costello is a classic example of a man who, he's like the new wave Prince, that he just made
too much,
so many records, and good to him. He's a true artist. So many records in so many different forms that I think audiences, although he took most of his audience with him throughout, there's a core that happy. A lot of hardcore Jam fans hated the Style Council, but a lot didn't, and a lot really admired his change. When it went all a bit UK, the original Garage, it got.
But my favourite is actually the one just before that, was Confessions of a Peddler. Fantastic.
It's a very deep sea. I mean, it's just it's wonderful, and his first solo album, I couldn't believe it's still my favourite Paul Weller album, because it was just what was needed at that time. You had grunge going on, and you had CD culture of all those sort of adult artists, and actually to hear someone playing sort of 60s influenced music with a sort of dance, a few beats in there, was just like, well, and really that's what Britpop became, so and that's what he's good. Where I don't, Costello, I think his audience is growing older. I mean, Weller's audience is growing older, but there's not like you put on Town Called Malice on a night out and people go mad for it, and that's kids as well. Whereas Costello, Pump It Up, you can play, but there's not that one that really sticks in the psyche in that way. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe tell us if we're wrong. That's the great thing with Needlepoint. You will have an opportunity to feedback. I'll point down there, because everyone does that in a podcast. So it'll be something down. Look at this.
You mentioned just before Amiga auctions, which you went.
Yes.
And I think 2 nights ago I went to see Peter Perrett.
You were there with his trousers.
Yeah, the trouser gate, and it was actually interesting because a couple of the people reviewing it on Facebook said that the sound was absolutely appalling. I thought it was really good sound.
Were you downstairs?
I was downstairs.
I think it's everyone who said it was appalling was in the balcony.
He was upstairs, and I thought the version of Another Girl, Another Planet, which of course we were all waiting for, was rather thrown away. Yeah, it could have been better. But some of the new stuff was good. But what else have you been up to the last couple of weeks?
Well, last night I went to there was a thing called Jam for Jack. Jack Bruce as a huge sort of ongoing charity by his family, and it was
a man at the cold face was there, wasn't he? Tim Jones.
Tim Jones was there. Tim and I, and Andy Rawle, who does some live reviews for us, was there. Paul Davis, who writes for us, was there as well, and it was down in the Gibson Garage on East Castle Street in central London, which is amazing. You go in and it's, the amount of guitars. Obviously, it's a guitar shop. There's going to have guitars, but like the amount of guitars. And they had this thing like a conveyor belt, with all the guitars hanging down off it, like a funicular railway or something, just going round. All these guitars just moving in front of you, and all these, SGs and Les Pauls, and anyway, downstairs in the Epiphone room, and it was you just think, could you spend that much money on a guitar? Anyway,
you could. Sorry to break in, but you could, because according to our news pages this month, our lead news story features Jeff Beck, the guitar collection, which breaks all auction records. Some of those guitars are going for, they're all in the hundreds of thousands.
The whole thing went for collectively 8 million on guitar. You
Who
know,
buys that? I mean, it's collectors obviously, but I mean, are there musicians? Do we know? Do they go public, or
you'd
is
like
it
to
kind of?
think so, but some, hedge fund people have it on their. Here, I've got Jeff Beck's guitar. Like I can say, here, I've got a tapestry Peter Hamill logo made by my daughter for me. They can say, look, I've got Jeff Beck's guitar and it's cost me £4 million. Or here's an Orinoco badge that cost me £2. But, I suppose it's that thing. It's what people like to surround themselves with. So it's there, but yes, just briefly, Jack Bruce and the children, and Gary Husband on drums playing, and then the end, they did the 3 songs: "I Feel Free," "White Room," and "Sunshine of Love."
Mm.
Mark King on bass, Phil Manzanera on guitar,
Oh wow!
and Gary Husband on drums. And honestly, it was just Manzanera, I think is a very underrated guitarist, and I'm not a huge fan of guitar solos and things, but he was adding that sort of Manzanera art to it a little bit. And of course, Mark King, because he did a version of "I Feel Free," he did a solo album in 1984 called "Influences," and it was a bit like, wow, the jazz funk man is playing Jack Bruce. So anyway,
So just to bring things full circle, actually, funny talking of Phil Manzanera, a man who I once turned to at the Brit Awards and said, "So what do you do then?" I just didn't recognise him.
that always
With his
works
silver
well.
beard. But he did actually say to me once, going back to 10, you're right, I am obsessed with him. He did say that of all the people he's ever worked with, and that includes Brian Eno, Godley and Cream were the smartest.
Yes.
And I think, well, blimey, if Manzanera thinks it, then it must be.
Because wasn't he originally? Weren't they going to be a trio with him? That was one of their ideas.
I believe so. Yeah, I think they put it up. So, thanks everyone for listening to the very first Needlepoint podcast. This is the kind of thing we're going to be doing on a monthly basis, talking about Record Collector, the very good magazine that we both worked for, and talking about the content of the magazine, and also spinning off to discuss matters collectible, things we've been up to, and Daryl's immense wealth of contacts in the biz. He'll be extemporizing on all of that. I mean, look at that lovely collection. I'm trying to work out what's a better backdrop: my Todd Rundgren picture made entirely out of vinyl, or your lovely array of CDs, vinyl, and books.
I tell you what, you do an ABBA soap, ABBA the soap.
ABBA the soap, that's
And
fantastic.
Jules got that for Christmas in 1978 and kept it. And the marvelous thing, I interviewed Frida once, and I got Frida to sign it for her. And Frida, the lovely thing about it was, ABBA, the soap. ABBA are without doubt one of the greatest pop groups of the 70s. Seemingly never out of the hit parade, this musical phenomenon combines the easy-to-hum songs of Björn and Benny and the catchy singing of Agneta and Frida. And now, Grossmith brings you your own ABBA soap, featuring their famous name on one side and a clever copy of a cassette on the other. And the most amazing thing is Jay Grossmith was a company in Winsford in Cheshire. And she said we were on tour or something, or we were doing TV, and we were just taken to this warehouse, and there was this huge pile of soap and a huge pile of like ABBA deodorants or something. And they just went, yeah, fine, yeah, that's it. And, that was it, officially sanctioned. I mean, can you imagine that now, with the way the bands control their merch?
Well, yeah, and memo or a note to everybody out there that works on such things: keep the memorabilia and the tour T-shirts and the jackets coming, because I used to be able to literally dress myself based on the freebies that I got sent to Melody Maker and Uncut, where I used to work previous to this. Because I get the occasional thing, but not like the olden day, where literally you'd get jackets, T-shirts, hats. I've still got a Daft Punk tour jacket. What would that be worth?
Oh, quite a lot of money.
Quite a couple of quid.
It's nice,
How unhygienic and dirty would you have to be before you actually cracked open that ABBA soap?
Oh, well, I think if there was no soap left in the world, sort of thing.
Right, it would have to be that desperate.
I mean, it's still got quite an aroma around it.
Needlepoint, the Record Collector podcast with Paul Lester and Daryl Easlea.
So thank you very much. Everything you just said there, Paul, I completely agree with, and we'll see you next time. Please follow us We'll be doing this monthly. It will just be the two of us. Sometimes we'll have guests. Sometimes we'll actually feature people who are in the magazine, which will be absolutely lovely. But thank you very much for watching. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.